wonderful Saturday afternoon. I certainly am at the moment. Excited to sit down and answer some questions today. We got a chat already. Pero like Y says, waited for the ASU game to be over to start stream. You know ball. I mean, I like to think that I know ball. I have no idea what games are on right now because, quite frankly, I don't follow college football during the season very much, but I will take the compliment nonetheless. We've got Meyer here in the chat, one of our YouTube members. He just caught the members only stream last night. He's back again for more Dynasty talk, I can see. We're going to jump into the mailbag questions here pretty quickly because I've got a good number of them to get through. So I asked these questions in the Discord. If you're coming to this stream not from the Discord, yeah, you should get in there. It's in the description. It's free to join. I do collect questions. I collect trades, things like that I can talk about on stream. It's an awesome community. I think we're pushing up on like 500 people in there. So super cool. But I've got about 15 questions or so to get through here, and I'll definitely take more questions as we go. You know, right now, there's not like one Dynasty topic that we need to hit on. In a lot of leagues, the trade deadline has passed. We're kind of just waiting for the playoffs to come. We're waiting to see what happens in kind of the random Plinko style fantasy playoffs where every matchup is just basically a weighted coin flip. We're hoping to get those playoff buys. But really, I mean, there's just not that much that has to happen right now. So I just thought I would take some questions today, address a lot of different topics, and get some thoughts out there. So we're gonna jump in here. Dominic says, I need to fix all my Dynasty problems in this stream right now today. So I will do my best. The title, I'll admit, it does offer, promise a lot, build better Dynasty teams. I'm hoping that after today you can build even 1% better Dynasty teams. But if you don't like the advice, you can blame the questions. I'll just blame the questions. But let me just jump in here with the first question for today. Let's see here. I've got these screenshotted, so I'll put them on the screen. That way, if you tune in at any point, you know what we're talking about. The first one, since it's on the thumbnail, might as well get it out of the way. What should Josh Allen's price be? 4 firsts, more or less? I would say 4 firsts is honestly about right in my Dynasty rankings, which are available to Pure Potential members. You can check the pinned chat message if you're curious about that. I have him ranked as a 3.5 base firsts player, and he's the only guy I have in that tier. So I have him first in that tier, or I have him alone in that tier, but he's really a guy that you just don't trade in Dynasty. The only time you want to trade a guy like Josh Allen is if you're forced into it. And you're really only forced into it when you have a low value team. So, you either you mismanage your team or you maybe you take over an orphan team and you have Josh Allen and you have a lot of nothing around him. You have players that have aged out or you don't have rookie picks, and all of a sudden you're just struggling year after year to try to build something competent around Josh Allen. At that point, you can't really afford the luxury of having a Josh Allen type of player. And you are, basically forced to auction them off to the highest bidder, split them up into multiple assets that can all gain value for you and ultimately boost the buying power that you have and potentially fill multiple roster spots rather than just one. And so that would be my overall take on that. But yeah, I think around 4 firsts is just a fair valuation. Here we have a comment about Josh Allen. Looks like, I'm going to have to balance. I didn't think that through. I'm going to have to figure out how to get the chat messages on here and the Discord questions on here. For Josh, I gave Kyler, Ayuk 26 first and 25 second. Overpaid a bit, but had the most capital. Top 4 rookie picks or lottery anyways. I think that's a fine trade, honestly. Like, I'm a little worried about Ayuk anyway. I don't think his value is super high at the moment. A second in the context of a trade for a Josh Allen type of player is pretty minimal. So, call it Kyler and 2 firsts basically for Allen. I think that's reasonable. I don't think that's a crazy deal at all. We got Toronto Dave here. What's up, Dave? Happy to see you in the stream today. one of the OGs for sure. Nicholas, that was your question about Josh Allen. I appreciate you tuning in to hear the answer. I guess you're good to go, right? You got your answer. So, you can still stick around if you want to hear the rest, but we got yours out of the way real quick. I do want to jump in here with this second question because it's very much related to the first one. This one comes from Clanger34. For guys like Jamar Chase that are at the top of dynasty value, do we sell at an assumed apex if not contending, or are they never trades barring a blatant overpay? So this is a good question. I think it really ties into the last one, which is when you can get your hands on a superstar player. And for the most part, these are going to be quarterbacks and wide receivers because the shelf life on running backs makes them kind of always in flux where you're not contending. You're probably better off trading away a running back. But I'll bump Brock Bowers into this discussion as well. Guys like Bowers, Jefferson, Chase, Jayden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, you're pretty much not trading those players away unless you have to. Just like I said with Josh Allen, there are only so many guys that can offer you a positional advantage, and they're very hard to trade for. When you go out and you say, hey, is player X available? Most of the time, if it's one of these top end players, you're just going to get a flat no, or they're going to say, send an offer, and the offer you send is never going to be good enough for them. And so when you have the opportunity to get one of those players, or when you have one of those players, I'm typically just going to err on the side of holding them. And again, not moving them off to other teams unless I really need to because of value. Otherwise, I'd rather just go out and solve my problems with other assets. Now, if you are rebuilding, as this question says, that might be a case where you're in that position of a team that doesn't have enough value. That's when you can be backed into a corner, and maybe you do need to split up Chase and get 3 firsts, or tier down to another wide receiver and pick up a first, something like that. But again, not something that I like to do, not something that's very fun to do, I don't think. All right. Let's see here. What is Pitt's value at this point? Wait, I thought I fixed this. There we go. We got to get the chat on top of the questions. What is Pitt's value at this point? I'd say in tight end premium, probably about a mid-second, I think is fine. He's still going to have some games. He's clearly not a consistent option. Early this year, he was living off of some big plays. He was still not really ever the focal point of the offense, or he was never really even the second option in the offense. And as a tight end, that's just not going to lead to consistent production. It's another reason why I was kind of off of him even after those big games. Is just really hard when you have 2 target earners ahead of you in the pecking order. And his first read target share always reflected that he was more of an outlet guy, more of a game script dependent guy. But I'd say just due to his, still being young, the position being so inconsistent generally, I'd say about a mid-second. All right. Core Tricks, welcome in. I've got one of your questions coming up here soon. Let's see. Not quite yet. We got one from Scoots, who is one of my active commenters, always comments on my videos. He says, Travis Etienne just posted restart, reset, refocus as many times as you need. Should I be refocusing his ass to a different dynasty team? That one, easily the funniest question that I got. I appreciate that one. My answer would be no. I'm not refocusing him to a different dynasty team. Right now, I'd be more of a buyer on Etienne than a seller. I think his value is pretty much in the basement at this point. He hasn't really had a big game in a while. He's had injuries. People drafted him highly, expecting a lot. I saw him go I saw a potential trade of him. It was like a 2025 second or Travis Etienne and a 4th. I would just rather have Etienne than a second. I think you look at what he's accomplished in the past. He has pedigree as that first round draft capital. He has high-end fantasy finishes in the past. He's going to be back in Jacksonville next year. He's on the 5th-year option. They picked it up. with Tank Bigsby also there, I don't think there's much risk of the team investing in other running backs. And so I think really it's just a bet on the offense as a whole being better next year. And that's something that I think is pretty likely. I mean, I think it's hard for it to be worse. I think they're going to have a whole new coaching staff. So I'd be more of a buyer on Etienne when people seem to be willing to move him for like a mid-second. All right. Elijah J asks, who are some guys who had off years or had season-ending injuries that rebuilding teams or just any teams in general should be looking to target for next year? Well, Travis Etienne would certainly fit that category, having an off year. I think there's a lot of guys that have had those types of years, that have had those injuries this season. My video from last week is really all about this topic, and I named a bunch of players, so I would recommend watching that. It's the one with Dak Prescott on the thumbnail. But off the top of my head, guys that jump to mind would be like Chris Olave, would be like Rashee Rice. I do see a message about Rashee Rice somewhere in here. I definitely think that he's a good buy. One of my favorites, actually. JJ McCarthy is one of the absolute best buys in all of Dynasty right now. Anybody that thinks that there's some kind of risk of him not starting the year next year, I think that's highly exploitable. Dak Prescott remains a great buy in Dynasty due to the injuries. So for the most part, I'd say players that have had injuries. The issue with guys that just have the off season is sometimes we don't know if that off season is evidence of a decline or if they're going to rebound. And if they've already had that bad season under their belt, they have a little bit less grace with the rest of the Dynasty community, as opposed to injuries where people are going to be more likely to rebound that value very quickly. One other name that would come to mind would be Tank Dell. I think a lot of what we've seen from Tank Dell, just as far as his disappointing performances this year, can be linked back to the broken leg. I think it's a pretty valid, excuse or argument for why his production has been limited, and he's still pretty young. So tethered to a good quarterback, obviously. We don't know if Stephon Diggs is going to be okay at all next year. And so I think he could be a good buy low target as well with just how much he has struggled. Ben Cooper says, roast me for my Bryce Young trade in the Pure Potential Invitational. Dude, you're going to have to remind me what that Bryce Young trade was. Did you trade a first for him? Ben, you're going to have to remind me. Ben Cooper is in the one and only Pure Potential Dynasty League that exists at the moment. There will definitely be more this offseason, and I'll definitely be stocking those with people from the Discord, so definitely want to join there if you can. But you're going to have to remind me of the trade you made for Bryce Young. I'm sure that I didn't love it. All right, let me just grab one more of these questions here. Yeah, shocked emoji has a point. It took Pollard about a year to be back to 100% after his leg break. I think it's a serious injury, and maybe we were just a little bit too bold about his recovery timeline. It did happen pretty late in the year last year, so I think it's reasonable to think that he could be much improved in 2025. All right, let's take a look here there's Cortrix's question. He asked me actually a couple questions. He got a little greedy here with this one. The first is, have you done any digging into the 2025 rookie class? And I can say right off the top, nothing on that front yet. I've got nothing. I haven't been following college football hardly at all. I know there's a bunch of people riled up about who should win the Heisman. I do not care. I only have energy and time in my life to care about NFL football. So as soon as NFL football is over, I will then dive into the rookie class. I'll get some mock draft stuff out. I'll get some early look stuff out with prospects, but none of that is ready to go. I will say it's absolutely not the strength of my analysis, and I'll definitely be guiding people in the direction of other analysts that I think do, even a better job with prospect analysis. People like JJ Zacharyson, who I really lean on when it comes to the prospect stuff. But you will definitely see rookie content from me coming early in the offseason. The second part of the question was, how should we approach the offseason as a rebuilder with a lot of draft capital? Who are some potential targets? what are some strategy nuggets we should remember to turn our team around. As far as targets, I'd say the guys that I was talking about in the last question, and I would say guys I talked about in last week's video, remain good targets. But as far as the rest of this question, what should we be doing with all that draft capital? I would say, first of all, be patient. Actually, that would be my number one piece of advice. If you already have a bunch of draft capital as a rebuilder, you've done the hard part. Like, you have succeeded pretty much, where your team's roster value is just going to continue to go up. And you really shouldn't, in any kind of an active league, struggle to throw together a lineup. So I think you just want to be patient and not screw it up. When you have that treasure trove of picks, it's really a seller's market. You're in the driver's seat because those picks are a finite resource, and they're a finite resource that a lot of people are going to want. So it is league dependent to an extent. I know there are some leagues where people just don't value picks, or they aren't gonna pay up for them. But for the most part, in my experience, when you have kind of cornered the market on draft capital, you kind of call the shots. And so you don't need to jump at every fair deal that comes your way. You don't need to immediately start shopping those picks right now and saying, okay, I need to go buy a wide receiver, I need to go buy a quarterback, I need a tight end. We are 9 months out from 2025 fantasy football. We are 5 months out from the NFL draft. So you have so much time to shop around, and you can just wait for good deals. Wait for players to be available at a discount when somebody just can't help themselves and they need that pick. Or you can try to package draft capital together to go and get star players that are really going to make a difference for you. But I don't think you need to start shopping to fill your lineup right now and say, I'm going to trade a second for Brian Robinson. I'm going to go trade, a second for, I don't know, Amari Cooper. I don't know, some lame veteran player that I'm going to put in my lineup. Just take your time, and those deals are going to come up, and you're going to get that team turned around for sure. But even if you have a young team heading into the summer, maybe you make a lot of rookie picks and you have a rookie heavy team, some of those rookies are going to get hyped up in training camp. You're still going to have a lot of time to maneuver, potentially build a contender, if you're willing to part with any of those rookies later on. So you just always have more time than you think. Circling back to the Bryce Young question from before, Ben says he basically traded a 2026 first for Bryce Young. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I would just never do. Personally, I think with Bryce Young, not that it can't work out, like it can definitely work out. He's looked a lot better recently. I think it's just not a lot of upside in that type of trade, because we've already kind of seen, I think we already kind of know Bryce Young has a limited ceiling as a fantasy quarterback, where he really can't get above like the Tua, Purdy, Goff type of tier. Just because he doesn't run. He's not anything, particularly special as an arm talent. So a 2026 first, that's a valuable piece. What does Bryce Young have to do to become significantly more valuable than at first? He has to really lock himself in as not only a starting quarterback long-term, but a starting quarterback that is adding value for you long-term. And I think that's a pretty tight needle to thread. So just not something I think is necessary. Totally fine if people want to buy into him for a second round pick, but I'm out at a price of a first. June C89 says, have you changed anything for your analyst rankings? Is Jacob Sanderson and JJ Zacharyson the only ones in the S tier? Honestly, I've had very little time as a content creator to consume the content I want to consume lately. So I would say I just haven't really been able to like broaden my horizons too much during the season. I'm sure there are other analysts out there that are, very good at what they do. I know Matt Harmon is great at the wide receiver stuff, but those are the two analysts I consistently go back to and make sure that I know what they're talking about, because I do value their opinions pretty highly in my stuff. All right, next question coming in from Elo. Are there times where it's okay to sell low on promising young players? For example, I traded away Trevor Lawrence and Olave for Etienne, and I'm a contender. So, I mean, I'd say anytime you're selling low, you know that you're kind of you're kind of doing something you shouldn't do. If you're acknowledging that it's a sell low, where you feel like that value is going to come back to you, but you're still selling anyway, you're kind of putting your hand in the cookie jar, and you might get smacked. So if you're going to get smacked, you at least want to make sure you're getting something worthwhile in return. And I would say this is a case where you're doing that. Getting Etienne, you're getting a high-end young player, a superstar player who's going to be putting difference-making production in your lineup, so that even a year from now, where like it's pretty likely you're losing this deal a year from now on value with Lawrence and Olave, you still have that elite asset. You still have a running back who can put 20 points per game in your running back spot. So I think that's the type of deal where it's okay. If you go chasing players like Derrick Henry or Tyreek Hill and you're selling low on your young players that are struggling or injured, that's the fast track to a rebuild. So I would say don't do that. But this trade, I don't have much of an issue with. Alrighty. Good one. Price check on AR, Anthony Richardson from Nick Yoon. I think I moved him back up into the late first tier. Unlike a player like Bryce Young, it's pretty easy to see what the upside is for Anthony Richardson if he can make it work long term. He has that top 5 scoring ceiling that we covet in fantasy football because he's a rusher, because he's so dangerous near the goal line. So I think a late first is fair, where you're still taking on a good amount of risk. There's no guarantee that the Colts are going to develop him long term. And I think if it's not with the Colts, he has a pretty thin path to succeeding elsewhere, because no other team is going to be incentivized to give him a long leash as a quarterback. He's going to find himself stuck in these camp battles or short-term auditions where he's going to have to really impress in a short period of time, kind of like Justin Fields. If it doesn't work out, he's on the bench again, and he's only going to get so many of those shots. So I think it's definitely justifiable to trade a late first, where especially if you really need some value upside on your team. But I'm out for more than that. All right, next question comes in from Eli. Thoughts on the Browns wide receiver quarterback situation next year? I've got Tillman and Jeudy. I can flip one this offseason, but not sure who's going to be the top target next year. So I'd say as far as the quarterback, I think right now the most likely outcome is that Jameis Winston is back as the starter, or they have a rookie. I don't think there's a lot on the market that they would go out of their way to get outside of Jameis. Like I don't know if there are any free agent quarterbacks that are enough of an upgrade on Jameis that they would go that route, as opposed to just bringing him back, especially because I think he'll be pretty cheap. If it's Jameis, obviously that's great for everybody there in terms of fantasy. If it's a rookie, that's going to be less great, especially with how this class is looking. But I don't think you really have to sell either of these guys. I think it's fine to roster 2 wide receivers from the same team, especially where neither of them are very cost prohibitive. I will say, if your deadline hasn't passed, Jerry Jeudy is a very hot name to sell right now, where you can potentially get a future first. I've seen that happen. I've also seen people get like 2 seconds. And not that I think he's a must sell. I think there could be some legitimacy to this sort of renaissance that we're seeing. But I think that he is a strong sell candidate to a contender right now if you're not using him. But you can carry both guys. Tillman didn't cost anything to get. Jeudy probably didn't cost you much to get. You're not getting more than a second for Tillman. You might not be getting more than a second for Jeudy once the offseason hits. I think if I had to pick between the two, I think Judy's the more valuable player. I think he's the most likely to be their quote-unquote wide receiver 1 next year. But again, they can both succeed. I like this question, so let me hit this one real quick. Why is Bucky Irving flying up draft boards when we've seen similar day 3 prospects pop and the market remain bullish on them? I think there's unique elements to Bucky's profile for a lot of reasons. The first would be that there was pretty high expectations for Bucky Irving heading into the NFL draft process, where he was widely regarded as one of the best running backs in the class before the combine. He was consistently top 5 in people's rankings, maybe even top 3, where he was on that high-profile Oregon offense. He was really good at evading tackles and receptions. And then the combine kind of tanked his draft stock and he falls to the 4th round. But people had high priors on Bucky Irving as a talent before he got into the league. And then we see him get in the league and he is immediately involved from the jump. You know, you think of somebody like a James Robinson, he required injuries ahead of him where he was basically the last man standing. Like you're talking, you know, the alternative options were not NFL caliber players. And regardless of what you think of Rachaad White, he had a stranglehold on that backfield last year. He was like a 300 touch player, and he very much is an NFL caliber running back. So for Bucky Irving to come in and immediately start to erode his work in that backfield after the trust that he had built up with the coaching staff, that's impressive. And then his play just jumps off the screen. He genuinely just looks like one of the best running backs in the league. He contributes in all phases of the game. And then the underlying metrics support that he has been a top 5 running back in the NFL this year. So I think just everything around Bucky Irving suggests that this team has no interest in going to a different running back. And then the fact that Rachaad White and Sean Tucker are both under contract there next season actually helps Bucky Irving because they have a competent 3-headed running back room. Why would they go out and spend capital on another running back when they have those 3 guys that they can work through? So I just think there's really no risk with Bucky at this point, and I think that's why people are so willing to buy into him. Landon Moore, thoughts on T-Law and Dak as buy low rebuilding targets? Yeah, I like both guys. I mentioned Dak earlier. I didn't mention Lawrence. I forgot about Lawrence, but I have them ranked pretty much back to back in Dynasty. I'm still one of those suckers who thinks Trevor Lawrence is good at football. His, you know, the excuses, they mount up year after year after year. I think it's just possible that some players find themselves in bad situations time after time after time. I don't think there is any, you know, upper limit where we have to say, oh, well, you can't make excuses again because he's already had excuses. I just think, once again, we have the same coaching staff. This Press Taylor offense is so unimpressive. Not creative at all. The offensive line continues to be terrible. He's had injuries to Kirk. He's injuries to Ingram, injuries to Etienne. You know, his only consistent presence in the offense is a rookie wide receiver. I think he's good. I see him make just so many plays that impress me, and he's still locked up there long term. There's still a decent cast of weapons around him. I'm going to be excited to see him next year with a new coaching staff, especially if they can land a decent play caller. But yeah, I think they're both good buy lows. I think they're both undervalued in the market as it stands. All right, let's go to It's Sports 01 question. What are your optimal dynasty settings? I've actually got 2 back-to-back ones that are connected here. So optimal dynasty settings, I'm in a 1 quarterback start 8 and want to add a second league to my repertoire. Great use of that word, but I want it to be a different feel. Yeah, I can't fathom playing in a 1 quarterback start 8 league. That sounds so boring to me. No offense. I play in exclusively Superflex leagues at this point. So the thing about Superflex is it turns the quarterback position into pretty much an afterthought, kind of a useless position in Dynasty, into like the primary position in Dynasty. And I think it's just creates a much more interesting dynamic in trades. So I like 12 team, PPR, Superflex, tight end premium, start 10. That's where I like to sit. You know, I like 10 starters because it forces you to actually find those valuable flex players. You know, start 8 is really just a question of how many superstars can you get on your team. And there's a lot less weekly variance in that. I like the start 10 feel where you're testing your depth a little bit more. You get to enjoy a lot more players down the board where otherwise you might just have these bench players that don't ever hit your lineup. And I like PPR versus half PPR because in Superflex, it helps those skill position players keep up with the quarterbacks a little bit better. Whereas if you play, you know, I'm in a league that's half PPR, 6-point passing touchdowns, and that's like creates a huge gap between the quarterbacks and the other players, especially the wide receivers, where there's just a massive gap between the quarterbacks and the rest in terms of scoring. So that would be my optimal 12-team PPR, Superflex, tight end premium, 10 starters. That's what I like the most. You know, once you get to 11 or 12 starters, it starts to get a little a little bit dicey, but it can be fun for sure. You end up starting some really weird names from week to week at times. And then the second part of this question comes from Scoots. He had a second question here. What are a few of your favorite, more specific settings to enact in new Dynasty leagues? Trade deadline timing, draft rules, playoff bracket, etc. How do you approach doing so? So my thoughts here, nothing too crazy. I think trade deadlines should be week 13, week 14. That's my preference. I used to be a no trade deadline truther. Definitely have changed my mind on that. I think trade deadlines are actually key I think they actually help rebuilders, where usually the line is that the no trade deadline doesn't help rebuilders. I think no trade deadline actually hurts rebuilders because nobody is forced to make preemptive trades before the playoffs, and they can sort of just ride into the playoffs and only buy players when they need them. And they're probably only looking to buy high-end players, and they're probably going to want to buy those off of the playoff teams that get eliminated before them because they're going to have the best players for sale. So I think you need to have a trade deadline before the playoffs start, and week 13 or 14 would be my preference, just to allow the most time to maneuver those deals. As far as playoff brackets, I don't really have any weird rules for that. I mean, I play all but one of my leagues are 12 teams. So we have 6 teams in the playoffs. We get 2 buys. We have some of them are default, where you set the bracket on both sides and you play through. Some of them do reseeding, where the lowest seed always plays the highest seed. I don't really care either way. It doesn't matter to me too much. It's mostly random anyway. So I think normal playoff brackets are fine. I do think it can be fun to do a consolation bracket for the non-playoff teams, where the winner gets like a 113 pick, an extra rookie pick. Or even like an extra second at the end of the second round or something. That can be pretty fun to give those teams something to play for. But my last one would be draft order. I think for draft order, the non-playoff teams should always be ordered by max points for. So Sleeper tracks that automatically. I'm sure MFL does too. I don't know about other platforms. But max points for is basically what would your points for be if you set your perfect lineup every week. I think this is a lot better than win-loss record, because that's mostly determined by the luck of the schedule. And I think it's better than points for, because max points is a better indicator of the overall strength of your team. And it also removes any incentive for people to set bad lineups on purpose. You have nothing to gain by benching Patrick Mahomes or benching Bijan Robinson or whatever, because your max points for are not going to change. And so it's just a really easy way to just eliminate any kind of bad faith tanking. You want people setting their best lineups every week to make the games competitive. So max points that's kind of a deal breaker for me. I need that in my leagues. As far as an approach to get this to happen, I mean, if you're in an existing league, I think it's just something you have to bring up early in the off season and just try to explain, why it would be better for the health of the league, why it would lead to more competitiveness or more fairness across the league. You might want to talk to some managers privately and then see if you can get them on your side first, so that you have a little momentum going into that conversation. But that would be pretty much my advice on that front. We do playoff teams where the winner of the 3rd and 5th place game matches gets the better pick, so everyone has a reason to try. I think that's a cool idea. I don't think any of my leagues do that, but I do like that idea. I mean, I especially like when the 3rd place game has some kind of stakes. So I think that's a cool one. All right. Let me just catch up here on some of the chat, just see if there's anything we need to address here. I will say no. Crixus07, I would definitely not. Oh, wait, I read this backwards. Yeah, I'd rather have Lawrence than Richardson, personally. I would definitely rather have Lawrence in a super flex format. What do I do with Michael Pittman Jr.? I have Downs and Mitchell as well. Way too much stock in Colts. Yeah. I mean, it's not great to have 3 wide receivers attached to a quarterback that can barely support one. I think A.D. Mitchell might be borderline dead at this point. He just makes so many boneheaded plays, and the team seems to not like him. So that problem might solve itself pretty soon. As far as Michael Pittman, I think there's really not a market for him right now. I think he's just a guy you have to hold as for the time being. I mean, you can sell him for like a mid-second. I have no issue with that. But you also might just have to accept that he has moved from kind of a staple of starting lineups to more of a flex reserve type of guy. But Downs is the real prize there. That's the guy you want to hold on to, I would say. All right. Let's keep it moving here. Another question from Elo. He says, we have seen a change in how running backs are valued, and especially with older ones still being productive. Is this more of a lucky variance here for running back versus wide receiver injuries, or is the preconceived value of old running backs or running backs in general due for a change? I think this is going to be one of the biggest talking points of the offseason, and I'm excited to see how other analysts kind of address the elephant in the room as far as running back value in Dynasty, because we used to see tons of running backs go early in Dynasty startups, and that had completely changed, and now it seems like we're going to get more of a renaissance there. But as you know, my initial thoughts on this, I will say the injury situation is 100% variance. It is incredibly improbable to get the string of wide receiver injuries that we've seen. Think of guys like Olave and Rashee Rice and T. Higgins missing a lot of games. Tyreek Hill not missing games himself, but Tua missing games and making him basically useless. Just a lot of wide receiver injuries. Nico Collins going on IR for a time. Puka Nacua missing a lot of the season. We've had a lot of bad luck as far as wide receivers. And then you look at these older running backs, Barkley, Henry, Mixon, Jacobs, Kamara. We've hardly had any injuries out of that group. I know Mixon had the high ankle sprain. He missed like 3 or 4 games. But otherwise, this group has been insanely healthy. And it's just not normally the case. And I don't think it will continue to be the case indefinitely. I think we're going to see that level out at some point, even if not this season. So yeah, as far as injuries are concerned, the older running backs have run extremely pure in 2024. And that's just part of the game. You know, that happens. But I do also think we're seeing part of what's buoying these older running backs is we're seeing kind of an unprecedented amount of talent from the 2016 to 2018 running back classes that are all passing the age apex. So these classes, especially the 2017 class, just an unbelievable amount of running back talent entered the league at that time. And around that time, we were coming out of kind of a dry spell as far as running back classes, like 2013, 2014, pretty bad classes, 2012 as well. And so I think part of our perception of old running backs falling off is, yeah, a lot of it's rooted in historical data, but also the recent data that we had was a bunch of running backs that weren't very good in the first place, all being out of the league by the time they were 28 years old. Now you look at Henry, Mixon, Barkley, Kamara, Aaron Jones, James Conner, all from 2017 and 2018, except for Henry, who was the year before. There's a ton of these incredible running back talents that are keeping the position afloat. And I think it's just that there were so many good running backs, even though we've lost some soldiers along the way. You know, we've lost Dalvin Cook, we lost Austin Eckler, Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb. We lost some of these. Nick Chubb's, he's around still, but he's, you know, coming off an injury. We've lost a lot of these guys along the way, but there were just so many good running backs. It was just statistically likely that some of them were going to continue to be elite producers, even past their age apex. I think that is a dynamic at play. And then you look at the classes that came after that, 2020, 2021, you get guys like Dobbins, Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, Zach Moss, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, A.J. Dillon. There are different levels of success there, but you have a lot of busts, and then you have some like moderate success and no like true sustained superstars there. And so I think the fact that those classes were a little lackluster has also helped to keep those other running backs employed, keep them in good roles, getting good contracts. And I think we might actually see another downturn in older running backs as these 2020, 2021 classes start to age. So I think that we maybe get too focused on the large sample at some points, and we don't consider who the actual players are that we're looking at. Next question from Chris. I apologize. This one's not going to be nearly as detailed. He says, is there any particular strategy for gaming the value adjustment on keep trade cuts, trade calculator to your advantage? Frankly, I don't know because I don't really use calculators. The people that I play in leagues with would mostly just laugh at me if I sent them a screenshot of a calculator. I would say that I assume the best way to break these value adjustments is just kind of loading up one side with a bunch of filler assets like thirds and bench players, because it doesn't understand fully how to scale up when it comes to like truly valuable pieces versus filler pieces. And so the numbers assigned to those pieces are just going to make it seem like an even deal, even when it's not. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting question. I mean, if you have people in your leagues that care about those calculators, it's definitely worthwhile experimenting with it and seeing how can you kind of trick it into thinking one thing, thinking one side of the trade is better. Just a few more to get through here, and then we'll wind this thing down with a few more from the chat. This one says, what is Josh Downs' value in one quarterback league? Should I offer a first plus Christian Watson? I mean, I love Josh Downs. I think he's worth about a base first in your traditional superflex leagues. One quarterback leagues devalue first a little bit, at least the ones that are mid to late, because there's not quarterback depth pushing things down. So I would say that Josh Downs is probably worth about a mid first in one quarterback, assuming you're in a PPR league. So if this is a mid first, I wouldn't really want to add Christian Watson on top. If it's a late first, I think that can be fine. All right, pretty easy there. Mad Eye MD, one of our YouTube members, he's actually in the chat right now telling you, hey, if your league mates tell you what calculator they use, it can be very helpful for you in trade negotiations. Definitely true. He asks, what are we doing with Jayden Reed? Is he a must-hold until the offseason after that goose egg? Are you looking to trade him at his current value, or should we just wait for him to have another spike week or two next year and hope the hype turns around? I mean, I don't think he's a must. I don't think he's a sell. I think he's most likely a hold. I don't call anybody a must hold because I don't know what your league market looks like. I'd say most leagues right now, you're not really getting that peak value. People are going to want to buy low. People are going to want to send low ball offers for him coming off of a pretty rough stretch of games. I will say I'm still fine selling for a future first. So if somebody wants to give you their 2026 first for Jayden Reed, I think it's fine to take it. I do not believe that he is a like superstar wide receiver in the making. I think he's a very exciting player who does some things really well. And I think the Packers don't view him as an every down wide receiver or like a guy they want to build the offense around. He only plays in 11 personnel. And that means in some games when they're running a lot of 12 or they're running 2 running back sets, he's just not going to have enough routes to consolidate enough of the offense. So I don't know if that's a blocking issue or why he's not on the field, but that's been the case. So even with Romeo Doubs out, they just run Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks in those two wide receiver sets. And, you know, you can take that issue up with Matt LaFleur, but that's the data we have to work with. So I'm fine selling him for a first. I think right now is certainly not the best time to get a first. He'll probably have more big games, could have more big games this season. So definitely a player I'm willing to be patient with. I don't think that he's a particularly risky asset, especially right now, because he is a good player and he's not going anywhere. So just kind of a little bit of a low point right now. All right, last question we have kind of locked and loaded here in the chamber comes from Curtis. How do I treat some of the middle-aged running backs, B-Rob, Pacheco, who aren't locked up with deals yet? Is it a good play to ship them off for comparable players at wide receiver, given that the wide receiver position is more secure? So first of all, does make me feel pretty old that the guys we call middle-aged running backs are all younger than me. So that kind of hurts. But is it a good play to ship them off? I mean, in theory, yeah. In theory, shipping those players off that have some uncertainty, that would be a good way to mitigate risk on your roster with good running backs coming into the league, especially if you can just cash them out for draft capital or something that's extremely insulated. Unfortunately, your league mates are not ATM machines. I don't know why I said ATM machine. The M in ATM stands for machine, so that was pretty dumb. But they're not ATMs. They're not just going to give you exact change for whatever players you don't want and then allow you to go back and buy those same types of players later. So in practice, I think these types, the Robinsons, the Pachecos, maybe the DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne, maybe even like a Tyrone Tracy, who is actually 25 years old already despite being a rookie. I think those guys could be a little bit devalued in the offseason just because there's uncertainty, where, yeah, their teams could add running backs or their teams could sign running backs. But a lot of them are probably going to survive that process because the teams that tend to devalue running backs at one point, like let's say the Giants just investing in a cheap veteran like Singletary and then a rookie like Tracy, that's the exact same type of team that will just continue to devalue running back and stick with those guys heading into next season. And so I think it's case by case, and it's going to depend on how much conviction I have in the player. But I could see, depending on what the market's doing, leaning into some of those uncertain players. And where I do lean in, it's going to be more based around the guys that I think have high upside. So like a Brian Robinson, if it looks like they're just going to run it back with Robinson and Eckler, I'm not going to mind carrying him through the offseason. But I also don't think he has the type of upside where I really need to take a risk. Whereas with somebody like Pacheco, a healthy Isaiah Pacheco in that role that he had early in the season, that's a guy who is worth gambling on a little bit because he can be in that at least low-end RB1 discussion if he does make it through unscathed. Hunto, what's up? Hope everything's good. Everything is good here. We are just wrapping up all of the Discord questions. Another Discord member here joining us a little late. So, we're done with all those questions. I'm going to scroll back up here through the chat a little bit, hit on a couple more, and then we're going to get out of here and get ourselves mentally prepared for the last week of regular season fantasy football. And hopefully, when I flip over the cards on Monday, I'll have some best ball teams alive that I can sweat out next week, but we shall see. Let's see here. Thoughts on what to do with the 2025 101 as a contending team? I mean, there's certainly nothing you need to go out and trade the 101 for right now as a contending team. So I would say you're just going to keep holding it into the offseason. And considering that we are probably going to be taking Ashton Janty at the 101 spot, who's probably going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft, that seems like a pretty sick player to add to a contender. He might be a first-round pick in redraft next year. So I would say you can just hold tight. You've got a lot of time to figure it out, but it's definitely not something you're going to have to trade regardless of whether you're a contender or a rebuilder. Matt, I would not say that Pittman is an offseason buy if he gets healthy. I'm not really a big Pittman believer. I mean, I think he's a fine starting caliber wide receiver. I think his valuation early in the offseason was outrageous, putting him in the like 4th, 5th round conversation of startups when he's really not all that different from a Christian Kirk type. I don't think that was reasonable at all. He is, I would say pretty confidently that Josh Downs is the better wide receiver between the two of them. And that means he's going to be the wide receiver 2 at best in the offense. And if they have Richardson, that's not a very lucrative spot. Even if they have a different quarterback, I still don't think him, going into what is he? He's either 27 right now or he's going to be 27 in the offseason. He's not getting any younger. I think he just is what he is at this point, which is kind of a wide receiver 3 type, flex type of guy. In the right matchups, you might play him in PPR or whatever. But I don't think he's anyone that I would be going out of my way to target. All right, let's try to close this thing out with an Eagles question. Oh, wait, there's one more I want to hit after this. How are we feeling about Eagles Super Bowl chances? Fellow Birds fan, semi-related, do you think players' dynasty values move too much or don't move enough based on playoff performances? Well, I can say the one player whose dynasty value moved more than it ever should have based on a playoff performance was Gabe Davis. I wrote a huge thread in the offseason after Gabe Davis had his 4-touchdown game in the playoffs about how it was all a fluke and you should not be buying into Gabe Davis at these high prices, and people did not listen. He ended up being like a 5th round pick in best ball that year, and that did not work out. So I would say people have definitely overreacted before. I remember overreacting a little bit to a Cam Akers playoff performance in his rookie season, although I would argue that was warranted, and if he hadn't gotten injured, it would have paid off. It's neither here nor there. As far as Eagles Super Bowl chances, it's definitely, I mean, it's feeling more possible than ever right now. I think pretty clearly the second best team in the NFC at worst still have some odds to get the 1 seed. Pretty unlikely at this point, but you know, I think we have a very, very good chance of making the NFC Championship game, and I think it's probably a coin flip, maybe a little worse than a coin flip with Detroit if the game's in Detroit. So, you know, I'm hopeful. I'm just enjoying the ride. I did not think this season was going to go as well as it has, so I'm just sort of having fun with it. All right, Matt, we're going to end it with this question for real this time. Do you enjoy Dynasty Best Ball Leagues? I've never played in one. Yes, I do enjoy Dynasty Best Ball Leagues, and these leagues are very much very similar to regular leagues in how they're set up. The only wrinkle is that you don't set your lineup. Your lineup is set for you every week with the best possible players. So there's still waivers, there's still trades. It's just that you don't set a lineup, but it actually like completely changes the strategy of how you want to construct your team, because there's a lot of new wrinkles where, you know, for example, every lineup spot has value. So you don't want to stash a ton of guys that are injured or guys that are like contingent running backs. You know, you can't just line your bench with backup running backs because they're never going to get in your lineup until the starter gets injured. And so it is pretty interesting to see how the considerations change. You know, players like Marquez Valdes-Scantling become actually valuable waiver wire targets. Players like Grant Calcaterra or, you know, Taysom Hill or whatever. And then players can end up being sort of these unlikely heroes for you, where they string together multiple big games, but you never trust them enough to play them in managed formats. Like Jonnu Smith for a few weeks, people were not playing him after he had big games because they were like, well, this is just a fluke. But you have him in Dynasty Best Ball, and it's like, okay, great. He's just hitting my lineup every single week. So it's very much a different strategy, but I think it's a fun change of pace from regular leagues, and I think it's definitely worth being in one. I'm in like five or six Dynasty Best Ball leagues across my portfolio, and it is definitely fun approaching those with a little bit of a different perspective. So anyway, guys, those are my answers for you. I hope that they were satisfactory. We are getting in here close to an hour, so feels like a good time to wrap things up. I appreciate everybody that asked questions in the Discord. Again, if you're interested in being involved the next time I do something like this, go down to the description, join the Pure Potential Discord. It's totally free. If you're interested in joining the private channels in the Discord, where you can talk to me more directly, where I'm more active in answering questions and talking about trades and strategy, you can become a YouTube member. That gives you access to the private chat, gives you access to the members only live streams that I do on YouTube every week, and it gives you access to my top 200 Dynasty rankings, which are, I think, a pretty useful resource. I've been updating them every single week throughout the season. I'm actually going to be doing a video next week to sort of show off the rankings a little bit. I'm going to be talking about my Dynasty wide receiver tiers, looking ahead into 2025 and beyond. And that'll give a little sneak preview of at least some of the rankings, maybe give you a little taste to tantalize you into coming into the fold as a member, because it is absolutely the best way to support the channel, keeps these videos coming each and every week. So anyway, appreciate you guys tuning in today. I hope you all make the playoffs. I hope you get your bye weeks. Hope you have a fun time watching Week 14 football. And I will talk to all of you very soon.